Welcome and thank you for participating in the Humane Summit, a virtual speaker series brought to you by the Humane Education Coalition. We're thrilled that you're here with us today. My name is Megan Moon and I am the president and founder of the coalition, as well as the producer of the summit. We are delighted to kick off the summit today with Coffee and Conversation, a facilitated panel discussion sponsored by the University of Denver's Institute for Human-Animal Connection, with technology support kindly provided by Courtney Brown, Senior Community Project Manager at IHAC. We invite you to grab your cup of coffee or other favorite beverage and join us for this casual conversation with several leaders in our field. Together, we will explore the past, present, and future of humane education. As you may know, this is a very versatile field with a unique background and a wide range of definitions and perspectives. Thank you for taking advantage of this opportunity today to bring your questions, your ideas, your goals, and of course your refreshment of choice for an hour-long chat with experts in our field. Serving on today's panel are 7 change makers and thought leaders. We are thrilled to welcome, and feel free to give us a wave, Dr. Stephen Albone, Director of Education Programs at the Society for the Protection of Animals Abroad, or SPANA, Dr. Joe Anderson, Research Director at Faunalytics, Tim Grant, Publisher at Green Teacher, Dr. Stephanie Itle-Clark, Founder and President at the Academy of Prosocial Learning, Dr. Julie O'Connor, Teacher and Coordinator at Cliffside Park, New Jersey Public Schools, Dr. Bernard Unti, Senior Policy Advisor at the Humane Society of the United States, and Zoe Weil, Co-Founder and President of the Institute for Humane Education. Dr. Sarah Bexell at the University of Denver is unfortunately unable to join us today, but she will serve on the next panel called Tea and Teaching, which takes place Wednesday, February 6th at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So there are a few functions in Zoom that I'd like to very quickly go over so we can get started. First, we recommend that attendees choose the gallery view option in the top right corner of the Zoom screen to see all of the participants at one time. So if you're not already seeing that view right now, we do recommend making the switch to gallery view. It's nice. It's got a kind of a Brady Bunch feel, as we've mentioned previously. We also encourage attendees to please introduce yourselves in the chat section, and that's an option at the bottom of the screen, at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Tell us where in the world you are located, what you hope to gain by attending today's live panel discussion. Share with us your thoughts, your goals, anything you'd like in the chat section. We'd love to learn from you and with you. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask our panelists, please post it in the Q&A section. You'll see another little icon at the bottom that says Q&A. We will do our best to share your questions today with the panelists in the time that we have available, and we will continue this conversation in the summit, where a recording of our discussion today will be uploaded later. And we'll begin our discussion with a list of questions we have previously collected from a variety of educators. And let's get started with our first question. All right, so the first question is, could you share a brief explanation of the history of humane education for those who may be unfamiliar with the field's origins, and why is the history of humane education important for us to know today? And we were wondering, Bernie, if perhaps you could get us started on this conversation, and then we can open it up to other panelists.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Humane education predates organized animal protection itself. The kindness ethic was a central plank of character formation ideas that took hold in the wake of John Locke's insights concerning childhood socialization and development, and his and others' identification of cruelty as a harbinger of potential interpersonal violence. And in the consequence of that, humane education emerged as a powerful theme in children's didactic literature and as an important plank in the humane movement's formal agenda once it started in the mid-19th century.
Very, very helpful. And so why do we think the history is important for us to know collectively today? How can we use that information to learn and grow as educators and to continue to advance the field?
If I could continue, I'd simply say we don't step into the same river twice. This is not the 18th century. However, the fundamentals of child development, character formation, human psychology are the same. And we know or believe that the young are more open, more amenable to the message of kindness than adults in their formation. They're more settled patterns and beliefs.
Very helpful. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share on the topic of the history of our field?
Sure, I would love to say a few things. Thank you, Bernie. Bernie was actually one of the people who first made me aware of how humane education, when it was first practiced in the 19th century, was practiced not only to help children appreciate and be respectful toward animals, but was also focused on helping to protect children. So at its origins, and I hope I'm still correct in this, Bernie, I've learned most of what I've learned from the history from you, that more comprehensive view of humane education as including people and animals began to sort of dissipate when humane education became the primary purview of humane societies and became really focused on animal issues, and particularly companion animal issues, and early in the 20th century issues related to horses. And it was in the 1990s that some of us really brought back that original idea of humane education to make it more comprehensive once again. And so for many of us, humane education now is so comprehensive. It includes people, it includes animals, it includes the environment that sustains us, and it's in parallel to those people who are still focused primarily on companion animals. So both definitions sort of exist for people now.
Thank you, Zoe. That's a wonderful way to connect it to what humane education looks like today. Any other thoughts on the history of humane education? Okay. Oh, Bernie, do you have something else to share?
Yes, just briefly on that, I think we are in danger of forgetting what our advocate forebears understood, that education is the foundation of all humane work. Everyone on the panel implicitly, and most people in the audience, prioritize humane education, but I think we should be candid in saying it's not the fundamental preoccupation of most of the major animal organizations today. It's thriving pretty well at the grassroots, but the notion that it's fundamental to our work is undeniable to me, and it's a great lament that this view is not more widely shared. But today I'm preaching to the choir, as we all are, of course.
Great. All right, so our next question here is, what research currently exists that supports humane education and its efficacy? So do any of our panelists know of any more recent studies that could help all of us understand the value of humane education for learners? And Julie, I'm looking to you first. Maybe you could start us off with this question.
Yes, hi, thank you. So again, my name is Julie O'Connor, and thank you again, Megan, for your work at putting this all together. I'm really grateful that you did this. It's a really wonderful opportunity for us all to talk. So my research was published in January 2018, and it was a case study of teachers who used humane education. It's on open access if anyone wants to read it. The teachers were for different grades, and what they relayed to me was that if you were to use humane education infused into any subject, you would see that the students were more motivated and engaged to learn. So now, they were noticing the age and of the student, the gender of the student, the types of animals discussed, and the case study goes into that. But overall, humane education engaged and motivated students to learn. And more than any other curriculum enhancement, the teachers felt. And those results can help us, those of us who advocate for humane education, because it makes for better learning. So I think that's important, is that we realize we have a few audiences that we want to convince, for lack of a better word. So not just the animal advocacy movement as well, to remember the importance of humane education, but also teachers themselves and curriculum designers. Humane education, because of children's natural bond and interest in animal protection, is better for education overall.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Julie. It's wonderful to learn about your work, and I think we can share some of those resources you mentioned in the summit. So we'll make sure that that is accessible to participants. Any other research our other panelists would like to share? Your silence, makes me wonder if this next question has a lot more value and importance than we realize. In what ways is research currently lacking for the overarching field of humane education? How can the general educator perhaps support growth in this area, and what is it that we could work together to achieve in the area of research? And Joe, I thought maybe you might have some thoughts on this one, and then we can open it up to the other panelists.
For sure, and I also just wanted, before I get into that, to note the comment asking if Julie might be able to post a link to the research. That would be great to have for everybody.
It's in Faunalytics, Joe.
I'll let you post the link.
I'll make sure that it's posted.
Awesome, thank you.
So
so on the subject of research that exists, there has been a fair bit of research that's been done in various ways on humane education. There's been some great qualitative studies like Julie's recent work, and some older ones as well, talking to teachers. There's been less that is strong quantitative work, and that's not to say nothing. There are some good studies showing changes in children's empathy, changes in their beliefs, their knowledge about animals, all of which are great and really important for the field in order to show that what you're doing is important as humane educators. Especially from the perspective of advocates who are really concerned about efficacy, about getting the message out to people in an effective way, getting more of that quantitative data in rigorous studies is incredibly important. So we've got a good starting point, but I think that we need more studies that include a control group, for instance. There aren't that many where you compare the humane education program against age-matched control children to show that any changes that you see are actually changes due to the humane education and not maturation or something else about the study design. That's incredibly important for showing efficacy. As well, just there's so many niche questions within the overall topic of whether humane education is effective, which I think everyone here believes truly that humane education is effective. That's why we're here. That's why you're doing what you're doing. Incredibly important work. But we need to be able to show that. And so getting more of these rigorous studies, and I fully acknowledge, and as someone who would like to do them, want to say straight up, they're incredibly hard to do. That's why there isn't more on this already. You're working with children, you're working with ethical and consent issues, you're trying to track things over time. All of these are really difficult tasks to achieve, so I absolutely don't want to minimize the fact that this is a very difficult area to research. But we need to try and get more research on these things that is rigorous and can get at some of those additional questions that you have, not just, is it effective, but what types of humane education are the most effective? What particular teaching methods will be the most effective? What age groups should we target? Various studies have shown different effects at different ages, maybe slightly older children in the like grade 4, grade 5 range versus grade 1 or 2. There may be differences there, and we don't have strong data on that yet. So that's what I want to really support, is just more research, more quality research, and working with research organizations like Faunalytics, hopefully, to get this out so that you have the support you need to say what you're doing is important and needs funding and needs resources, all of those things.
Megan, this is Julie. Can I say something? So to Joe's point, if Faunalytics had, published a synopsis of my research, everyone really should go to Faunalytics because, if it's out there, it's probably in Faunalytics. And that's a treasure trove of stuff. But to Joe's point, I also think if we could get research done with the students themselves, either quantitatively, does humane education increase their academic scores in different areas, maybe their English language arts or even mathematics scores. And the reason I say this is because my research was about their motivation and their engagement to learn. And I just want to be clear, the reason I picked those markers is because a student needs to be motivated and engaged in order to achieve better academic results, right? Generally. I guess you could have the occasional student who is uninterested but does pretty well academically, but for most people, you need to be motivated and engaged in the task of learning. And so it stands to reason that the children will do better academically if they're more motivated and engaged through humane education, which we believe is a very motivating curriculum enhancement. So yes, we do need more research, and the quantitative aspect being, can we have the academic results bear that out as well, test scores.
That's a great point.
Yes, it is. Stephanie, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, as they were talking, two things really popped up. And the first is one I found when I was doing my own research was there's little research on children, but what's out there, they're all using different definitions of what humane education is. And that itself is sort of a core of the problem. I feel like we really need to dig into studying teacher preparation programs, foundational educator programs before all the studies can be done with the children so that we have common language to use. And then also, Julie's right, there's so many teachers out there incorporating humane education already, but they're so busy, they're not writing it up. I know when I was in the classroom, I was doing action research projects, but I never wrote them up. They were instead of being observed by my administrator. So I would encourage educators who are out there to write up what they're doing. And if they need help kind of formally putting it together, reach out to the Humane Education Coalition or any of the other organizations, of the people here, because we really do need more write-ups of things that are actually happening in the classroom, like Julie was saying.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I have to echo all of the words of the other speakers. I have to apologise to Stephanie. I'm one of those people that's conducted a lot of research and hasn't written it up. But I have conducted a series of quantitative studies with children in Africa about the effectiveness of the humane education programs that SPANA operates. And I hear Joe's words about how these things are difficult to do. And the word I like to use rather than difficult is technical. these things are not necessarily difficult, but they are technical. And but I have shown with my work, which I have, although I've not written it up, I have reported at various conferences, that these programs can be very effective. Not only can they be very effective in changing the way that children think and feel about animals, but also I've conducted longitudinal studies which show that those effects are permanent. I followed up children for 2 years after the end of the intervention and found that compared to a control group, there is no lessening of the effect that intervention has had on them. So I think that's something that's encouraging that we can all take from this. I agree also that we need common ways that we can all quantify and these types of interventions, so that we're all communicating in the same way about how these interventions work and how we can share best practice. And with that in mind, actually, we're doing a project here amongst the domestic animal welfare charities in the UK to try and find a way to take that forward. And that's looking like that could be a very interesting way forward in the future for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Joe, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, so just off of what Stephen was saying, that sounds fantastic, that research that you've been doing. I would love to see it. I'm sure everyone else would as well. And just kind of to that broader point of educators who are conducting research in whatever form and aren't writing it up. Faunalytics, my organization, exists to get research to the advocacy community and the education community. So please, if you are one of those people, get in touch with me. I put my email address in the chat, joe@faunalytics.org. I suspect we can find a way of helping you out if you'd like it. If you need someone to work with you on analysis, you just need someone to give you a kick in the butt for the writing. Whatever form that can take, we would love to help you get your research out there. So please get in touch.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. And just want to put out a reminder really quickly for anyone who has questions for our panelists to please post your questions in the Q&A section. The chat section we're kind of using as a rolling conversation for all types of questions and ideas and insights and comments for our panelists. But if we have a question that we want to talk about today, please do post it in the Q&A so we can keep better track. With that in mind, does anyone else have something they'd like to share on the subject of research?
Just quickly, I want to thank all the people who've shared so far, because everything everybody said was so spot on. And I want to reinforce what Julie said. I was a humane educator for many, many years, reaching about 10,000 kids a year and seeing all of these incredible changes happening among those kids. And I never saw the need for research at that time because it was just so patently obvious how effective humane education was in terms of promoting compassion, promoting activism, promoting solving problems. And that, what I want to reinforce that Julie said is, right now, particularly in the United States, the educational world cares most about literacy, numeracy, and the achievement of scientific skills. That's what it cares most about. And if we can demonstrate that humane education advances those goals, then humane education can get easily infused because it will have demonstrated that. So I just wanted to reinforce what Julie said.
I agree with what Zoe said there, and actually when I'm selling these programs to education services in Africa, I actually make that connection, and it's just an assertion that I say these programs will help with children's academic performance as well. And that is simply an assertion, and it would be fantastic to have that information. Because we don't have the hard evidence, it makes it difficult for us to sell this to governments, to curriculum developers and so on, and get this kind of information or get this kind of education into mainstream teaching in the UK and elsewhere. And one of the approaches, we've tried this again and again in the UK, initiatives largely led by the RSPCA, but backed up by other animal welfare organisations in this country. And we're taking a different tack now. We are saying now that, okay, we don't have the hard evidence that it supports numeracy, literacy, and these other things, but what we can say is that this has an important effect on children's moral development and their development as engaged learners and citizens within their communities. And we are using that approach now to lobby government to try and get these ideas into mainstream education, but through that personal and social development type routes instead.
Excellent, thank you. Bernie, would you like to add on to that?
Just briefly, I just want to encourage humane educators at every level to introduce instruments or measures of impact, knowledge, and concern that are suitable to your own needs. It doesn't have to roll up into academic research that persuades the broader education community or social work community. We've also got to make the case to local societies and their boards of directors, their executive teams, etc. The numbers that you reach, that's very important, but I think you want to really declare with confidence that it works, as Zoe and others have said. Intuitively, we believe it, and we've seen it with our eyes. That's how we know it. But you also want to demonstrate by every measure that you can, that it brings value. I think humane education conveys greatly to the brand and reputation of local societies and their work, humane societies, and it's really important to reinforce that so that the education community is not the only audience to be thinking about, and there are ways in which every one of you can be involved in helping to build out the case. In fact, we on the panel, some of us longer in the tooth, we're counting on you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Bernie. So we do have a question that came in I'd like to share from Dana. It says, it seems as though the general public associates humane education with teaching children how to be kind to companion animals. How can we as humane educators broaden the public's perception of humane education, given that it includes not only concern for all animal species, but human rights and environmental protection as well? And this is, I think this speaks to a lot of the other questions we've previously collected, and perhaps we can use this one as a guide for discussing how these issues are interconnected and how we can help to broaden the public's perception of humane education as a comprehensive field. And so I'm wondering, maybe Tim, if you have any thoughts from the environmental protection, environmental ethics sector to contribute to how we can work on broadening the public's perception.
Sure, thanks, Megan. I think it's still fair to say, at least from my perch, having published Green Teacher magazine for more than a quarter century, speaking of being long in the tooth, Bernie, and I think that it's still fair to say that humane education is still not well known amongst educators, and even those who are kind of caring and folks. It's real. It is a growing field. That's the good news, but it's still not. People don't really understand the powerful connections that humane education embraces, and the power of those connections to change lives, to change understandings, and so on. So I think we're still one of the more interesting articles, humane education articles we published some years ago, was by a couple of British educators. The title of their article kind of had me scratching my head. It was called "The Ultima Thule." And they said that there was a time when the Roman conquerors came to the north end of the UK, and they looked out at the islands further afield and said, oh, that's the Ultima Thule. We don't care about those. And so they stayed and conquered Britain and forgot about those islands. And I think in some ways, humane education is sort of just beyond the focus of attention of most of the educators that I work with. And yet, you know, I think what's all of us on this panel are aware of is again those powerful tools that humane education needs to, you know, needs to be shared with that larger network.
So how about you? Do you have a follow-up to that?
So many thoughts. Thank you for the question, Dana. And it's a question that is really near and dear to my heart. At the Institute for Humane Education, we define humane education broadly as education about human rights and animal protection and environmental preservation with the goal of enabling young people to become what we call solutionaries for a better world, for everybody. And it has been very challenging. Most people don't know what humane education is. If they have heard of it, it's usually in association with humane societies so that they believe that it's focused solely on companion animals. Some more broadly will think it's just animals in general. And I've even encountered people who like the term because they, you know, the word humane is a positive word and education's positive, put them together, it sounds good. But others have felt defensive. Teachers have felt defensive because they think that it's implying that what they're doing is inhumane, that they're seeing humane as an adjective describing education, not as a field of study. So I think the term is really fraught. And I don't have an easy answer. I mean, I've been doing this work now for 30 plus years, and I don't have an easy answer because we do have multiple definitions even among us right here. And I think I've been pushing for a comprehensive humane education definition to be the big umbrella definition, and people who are doing work on companion animal education are humane educators focusing on a specific topic within that broader definition. And I would say that the more that we can all get on board with the broad definition, the better it will be for everybody. You know, people who are doing environmentally focused work or companion animal focused work or animal focused work or human rights focused work, if we all see ourselves in this big umbrella that is advancing a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world for everybody, I think we all succeed. That was my soapbox talk.
Well said.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Tim. Does anyone else have thoughts on the topic of comprehensive humane education, viewing the field through a very holistic lens, or updating or refreshing our definition to better capture what it is we're hoping to achieve?
I think it's quite an interesting discussion because it does seem to be a discussion amongst humane education practitioners and people working in their little silos. But I think when you work with the children, they don't bring that to it. I think they do understand this. I think they do understand the interconnectedness of animals and people and how, you know, their fortunes are interlinked and how that relates to the environment where they live, at least, even if it's not the environment more generally. And so I think the children we actually work with, and I've seen this in lots of places in Africa, the children we actually work with don't have these problems. They, you know, and we target our education programs in that broad perspective, even though we work for an organization that is specifically interested in the welfare of working animals. We allow children to explore all kinds of humane education ideas in our education program, and it's fine.
Yes, go ahead, Stephanie.
Thanks, Stephen. And he's being modest, by the way. He also does a lot of work with educators that maybe he'll talk about later. But one of the things that's also, it's just, I hate to use the word soapbox because it almost sounds negative, but it's my passion, is not just the definition of humane education and getting one that the field can grow from as a core, but I really feel we need a strong pedagogical framework to be taken seriously. And without this framework, we're going to continue to have different piecemeal components that are all called humane education. And those pieces, of course, are being presented as the same thing. And so it's very difficult to then define what humane education is when we're out there in the public. I think all of us here attending today have probably had to try to define humane education to someone, and you've either gotten a look of confusion or they thought it was something completely different. Something that we're working on at the Academy of Prosocial Learning right now is that framework, humane pedagogy, and what makes that framework of pedagogy different than, for example, critical pedagogy or feminist pedagogy, or even critical animal studies. So I think it's something that we need to continue as a field to have a strong conversation, but I also think Stephen's correct. It doesn't mean we should stop going out there, because the children many times, they don't care what we call it, right? They're embracing the idea of compassion to people, animals, and the world that we share. But we as a field, I think we're at that point, we're really ready to begin doing a lot more academic writing, to be going to, education conferences and presenting this pedagogy to teachers so that they can incorporate it.
Great. All right, thank you so much. There is a question I'd like for us to, if we could switch gears a little bit, make sure that we touch on, because we do have such an international audience at this event. Now well over 500 participants registered for this event from all over the world. And I think often we tend to focus on what's happening in our own country, and many times that means what's happening in the United States. One question we received was, my United States-based organization is beginning to branch out to other countries. What differences should we be aware of between the educational services we offer our more Western clients and those in other areas of the world? What are some of the larger differences we should be cognizant of when designing education programs for an international audience? Stephen, do you mind getting us started on this topic?
Well, that's a really big question. I guess the easiest way to answer it is, when you work in different cultures and different countries, you have to go there with an open mind. You have to not go there with this idea of what you want them to know, or what you want them to learn, or how you want to change their behavior. What you have to do is go there and find out, like any good education does, any good educator does, find out where they're starting from and what they perceive they need and the direction they want to take, and then guide them on that journey. And I think I really think that's the most important thing. I think that if you go in there trying to impose your ideas on them, you are doomed to failure. Talking from an ex-colonial power from Great Britain that did so much work, if you like to call it that, all over Africa, they are very sensitive to the Brits going into their countries and telling them how to run their education systems and what they should be teaching, all those sorts of things. You have to work with them to do it, okay, and see where they're starting from and take it from there. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Thank you, Stephen. Is anyone else on that? Bernie, would you like to share?
Thank you. Yeah, Stephen has got us off to a good start there. I just wanted to share my view that the good news here is that in many parts of the world, people, humane societies, advocates, champions value educational outreach more than we do in the USA at present. At least in my view, that's the case. Here we tend to focus on laws, public policy. We're very punitive. We want to stigmatize cruelty. In most places, I think the field appears more open. Humane education, whether the differentiations in definition, meaning, etc., is seen as an important contributor to the development and sustenance of a civil society, as a gateway to making people better, as neighbors, citizens, parents, leaders, etc. So in that sense, outreach beyond America's borders is an extremely valuable frontier. There are cultural challenges and other challenges, as Stephen's comments suggest, and others may yet do. Thanks.
Megan, I'd love to add a couple of things.
Please do.
At the Institute for Humane Education, we have students and graduates from all over the world. And so they're bringing humane education to Asia, to South America, to Africa, and they're doing it through what they already know about those cultures. So by giving educators around the world tools in humane education and knowledge of humane education, they can then, with their own knowledge of their communities, bring it in as opposed to it being imposed. Which I totally agree with Stephen. And the other thing that I would say is we have a solutionary program at the Institute for Humane Education, and the goal of that is for students to identify the problems that are nearest and dearest to their hearts, and to work on solving those problems in ways that are good for everyone, people, animals, and the environment, and to identify the actual causes of the problem and really work to solve them. That can go anywhere. That's not imposing, you're going to learn about X in order to do Y. That's inviting students, wherever they are in the world, to address issues that are relevant and important to their survival, their future, the world. And we don't want to sell short, students in a country where they may be living in poverty without the same sort of resources, because that's even more of a reason to need this kind of education so that they can address those problems. And when I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we might think, oh, well, we shouldn't bring humane education there because what they really need to focus on is literacy and numeracy. I don't agree with that. I think that if young people are gaining literacy and numeracy skills while they're solving local problems, and some of those local problems are global problems. I mean, global warming is affecting disenfranchised and poor people more than wealthy people, that if we're doing that, we're really helping. And so part of it is really the attitude that we're taking when we go in. Are we taking an attitude that we are going to convey the answers, or that we are going to help you to learn to identify the issues and solve them using literacy and numeracy and science?
Very helpful. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you. Does anyone else have thoughts on this on the panel?
I would just say that there is a great appetite for this type of education in the developing world. That's all I can really speak for, in developing countries. And they look to the West, they look to Europe, they look to the United States, and they see these fantastic education systems with very high standards, and they don't know how to deliver that type of education themselves necessarily. And it's largely an issue that they've been taught in a particular old-fashioned style of teaching, and they're not familiar with modern learner-centered teaching methodologies, and there's a great hunger for it. And one thing that we have done at SPANA is tap into that by providing training courses for teachers, and I've been working a lot with Stephanie on this, providing training courses for teachers to actually teach them these modern learning pedagogies, dressed up as humane education, if you like, but actually giving these teachers lots of transferable skills which they can use in their mainstream teaching. And they just soak this up. There's a real large appetite for this, and that presents lots of opportunities for us to go out there and to help these communities to solve their local problems, as Zoe was saying. and to show them the way that they can help themselves, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so what we're going to move on in our last 15 minutes here. We do have another question that came in. This one we kind of already touched on a little bit earlier, but I thought I'd just present the question, and if you have anything additional to add, please do. How do we handle problems? This one comes from Bailey, I believe. How do we handle problems that arise when we encounter people who don't believe that this way of educating is beneficial? Even with the advancement of research, which is great, I have run into people who believe that incorporating animals into any type of education or other activities is arbitrary. So I think this individual is referring more specifically toward animal protection education, maybe bringing animals into the classroom. It sounds like the problem really is that they've encountered individuals who do not see value in this type of education. Does anyone on the panel have something to contribute to that? Stephanie?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. I think it's a reality for a lot of groups out there. We've all heard similar sentiments. I think one important concept is to ask them to think of humane education almost as a small stool with 3 legs. And in order to have a completely functioning stool, right, or society, all 3 legs need to be maintained, well cared for, because they are connected. And so if you get someone to sort of think about the systems that are in place in our world, that's definitely a conversation that you can begin with them if they are willing to have a conversation with you. Something else that we have developed over the years, because I get this question a lot, is to meet the individual where they are. Many of us are up here when we start talking about welfare, whether that's welfare for people, animals, or the environment. Sometimes the people are just being introduced to these concepts, and so they're not ready to go to the welfare conversation yet, right? The dissonance is too big. But they may be able to discuss public health components. So we developed the Humane Education Frameworks of Social Change to help educators think about where their programs or their conversations and outreach are falling and what their audience is ready for, right? So are they ready to have a conversation about public health related issues? There's a lot of, if you're working in animal welfare, there's definitely a lot of public health issues. Once they're comfortable with those, you can move into relationship-based issues, those systems thinking-based issues, and hopefully eventually help everyone move up the framework into discussing welfare as it impacts everyone who's living on the planet. Thanks, Megan.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. Any other thoughts on this topic?
Can I speak for a second? This is Julie.
Please do, Julie.
Okay, so in my research for the paper I wrote, one of the pieces that I think can help any of our listeners that I came across was, if you're United States based, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, they came out with their thoughts on the fact that there's a link between animal cruelty and violent behavior in society. I think that an untapped resource is law enforcement and those law enforcement studies, because the person who wrote the question, who I'm assuming gets resistance, we can talk about it with that lens. Teaching animal protection helps human safety. So I think that's something that's interested me as far as an advocacy point in studies. So we might not have all the studies we want in the humane education field, but we can look at those markers in society. Additionally, I did want to say that, I don't know if this is going to come up in your final question, but there's also a legislative aspect of this, and I'm talking as a United States-based person. In the U.S. schools, we have character education, a week of character, respect, anti-bullying things. They all didn't come out of nowhere. They came because they were educational mandates, right? So even though the teachers, you know, might not have had the most interest in teaching these things, they had to. We had month-long themes, things like that. So where did that come from? And when I researched it, the 1980s was a very big push for character education. Specifically, President Reagan and his Department of Education advisor, they really pushed character education. We could go into the reasons of why they did that, but it became educational mandates, educational directives. So the research is great, and we know we need it, but we also need to be conscious that we have to start changing some laws. And I like the idea of starting locally, which I think Bernie was mentioning. You can go to local school boards where if we bring our FBI proof and we bring our other proof, a lot of the research that comes from character education research generally, or social emotional learning research, we bring that and we say we need to have a week of, you know, respect for animals, and we can start there, and we can start to get the conversation going so that humane education becomes as mandated and mainstreamed as words like character education or social emotional learning is becoming now. But you know, these pushes, whether it be teaching about African American history for February or women's history in March, in America, and I'm going to talk, you know, specifically in the U.S., these don't come out of the goodness of everyone's collective hearts. They are mandated, and that's because of concerted effort of activists. So we have to be conscious of that as advocates.
Thank you, Julie. And I think that's actually a really good segue into our last couple of questions here in the last few minutes that we have available. Hard to believe an hour has gone by. It's just flown by. The question is, what is in store for the future of humane education? What does the field need to grow our collective efforts for meaningful prosocial change? And I'd like to turn to Zoe for just to get us started on the topic and then open it up. I'm sure everyone on this panel has something to contribute to this question.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, I'll be really quick then and say that my long-term goal is that the term disappears because it's synonymous with education. As simple as that.
Great.
I told you I'd be quick.
You weren't kidding.
There's lots of great minds here, and we only have 5 minutes.
I know. Any other thoughts?
If I could just, you know, jump in for a second. So to me, it's about changing some education laws and getting it much more incorporated. There's obviously more widespread usage of humane education. I know for me that if I was a student and, you know, I'm an animal rights activist. So if I was 11 years old and a teacher had mentioned, you know, a lesson and it was about animal advocacy in some way, I would have felt less lonely and I would have been much more engaged in learning and more excited to be there rather than feel like, you know, an odd man out. So let's, you know, get this into more classrooms, because there's lots of people like us who were kids who are waiting for that connection. So, you know, those, right, let's get it everywhere. But we need to also think legislatively and at least in this country. I just want to say one more thing about Stephen's point, because he's our international educator. In the United States, our system has been corrupted by test makers and test prep manufacturers. So I would think it would be a pleasure to go to a place where you didn't have, have a test that you have to give, for half of the academic year, or prepare for that test. So, that really does color a lot of what we do, which is why we always have to couch it with, oh, well, it can help your reading scores, it can help your math scores. Here, that is the game we have to play. That's just unfortunate, but you have to follow the money with that one. People make a lot of money over those tests.
Great, thanks, Julie. Tim, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Well, I think this last hour has also given us a pretty good sense that humane education really is poised for a takeoff. We need more research. I think that point has been well articulated. But once we have that research, and as we already have much of it, but once we have even harder, more qualitative data that Joe was talking about earlier, that's going to be hugely persuasive of larger educational organizations that we can lobby on behalf of humane education. And I think that it's such a natural extension of what so many of the educators I'm working with are already doing, that I think it's really a small step to be really embracing the powerful messages of humane education. So I think we're very close.
Great, thanks. Yes, Joe.
Just to Tim's point, yeah, I just want to follow up on that to say I hope that we can all work together, research organizations and humane educators, to get all of the knowledge and experience that you have into a place like I have, where we can put it all together and get it out to people. There was also a comment in the chat I just saw about putting all the research in a common repository so everyone can see it. The Faunalytics library has some already, but it's obviously not comprehensive because some people have research that isn't out there. So again, I just want to say, please, please, please get in touch with me if you have research you want to put out, or if any of you audience or panelists would be interested in talking to me to run future research. We'll need to talk to people to get your thoughts about what works, what doesn't, what we need to test. So please, if you're willing to help out, let me know.
Excellent. Yes, Stephanie.
Building off of what Tim said, I agree wholeheartedly, Tim. I think humane education is in a spot right now where we are ready to kind of take off in a way that perhaps we haven't been in the recent past. I think we need to look for more research. We also need to continue our grassroots work, right, with the people on the field. And I think we're going to see more and more work being done, hopefully, with pre-service educators. For example, I got permission to say today that there's going to be a book discussing humane education in higher education and how it fits within all the various departments there. It'll be forthcoming from Roman and Littlefield publishers within the next year. So I think we can see more and more things like that.
Excellent. Bernie, did you have another comment before we wrap up?
Sure. I think people have asked about diet, about climate change, about environment, about what to read, about how to make it fit. I just want to make sure everyone who's been on the line today joins us in understanding that you can state with confidence humane education has something to say or speaks powerful to all of the most pressing and urgent concerns on the global landscape: human development, population, peace, environment, childhood development, learning, all of those things. We can help you make the answers, but I just want everyone to feel confident in making that case. We can't hide our light under a bushel about this.
Great point. Excellent. All right, well, that's all the time we have today. I do encourage the panelists to please post in the comments here any recommendations you have, any book recommendations, articles, resources. Also, feel free to share them with me. I will ensure that they are shared in the summit for all of our participants to click on, to view, to download, to purchase. Please do share those valuable books and resources here as well as with me. As we wrap up our panel discussion today, I just want to share a reminder that participants who attend all 3 live panel discussions during the summit are invited to download a certificate of completion with 3 contact hours documented from the University of Denver's Institute for Human-Animal Connection and the Humane Education Coalition. The certificate is offered at no cost to participants and will be available to download at the end of the summit. We recommend checking with your state regulatory agency to determine if the panel discussions and certificate will meet the continuing education requirements for your profession. Thank you so very much to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. And thank you to our participants for joining the Coffee and Conversation panel discussion. We hope you will join us for future discussions and also make time to view our many amazing speaker sessions in the summit this week. We ask for your support to help the Coalition keep events like the Humane Summit fee-free for attendees around the world. Please consider making a contribution today at hecoalition.org/give. It is through the thoughtful support of donors like you that our Humane Summit is possible. So thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and we hope we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Megan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Keep
Bye.
up the good work.
Yes, thank you so much. Such a great conversation here today.